They called it pilot error, equipment failure, bad weather. For 25 years, the official report blamed Captain William Cooper for his own disappearance over the Rocky Mountains. But when two hikers stumbled upon wreckage in 2023, they uncovered something that investigators had deliberately ignored: a hidden confession that exposed a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Cooper didn't just die in a plane crash. He chose to crash his plane. And by the time you understand why, you'll realize that this man saved more lives than any pilot in history. I'm going to take you through this mystery step by step because every detail matters. Every choice Cooper made in his final hours was calculated. Every word he left behind was intentional. And when you hear his final message, well, let's just say it will give you chills. But first, we need to go back to where it all began. Not in 2003, when Cooper disappeared, but 5 years earlier, in 1998, when a young cargo pilot first noticed something that would eventually cost him everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you discovered that completing your job meant innocent people would die? Hit the like button if you think you'd risk everything to save strangers you'd never meet. And make sure to subscribe, because stories like this one, stories they don't want you to know, are exactly what this channel is all about. Picture this. It's 1998, and 37-year-old William Cooper is everything you'd want in a pilot. 15,000 flight hours under his belt, 18 years of commercial aviation experience, not a single incident on his record. His colleagues called him textbook Cooper because he never deviated from protocol, never took risks, never cut corners. Cooper wasn't just careful, he was obsessive about safety. He would spend hours studying weather patterns for routine flights that other pilots would barely glance at. He knew every airfield in the western United States like the back of his hand. He was the kind of pilot other pilots looked up to, the kind of guy you'd want flying your family across the country. But in the summer of 1998, during what should have been a routine cargo run to Salt Lake City, Cooper witnessed something that would haunt him for the next 5 years, something that would eventually force him to make the most impossible choice any person can face. Cooper was flying a standard cargo route from Denver to Salt Lake City. It was a milk run, the kind of flight he could do in his sleep. But as he was taxiing to the cargo area at Salt Lake City International Airport, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Military personnel were loading unmarked containers onto civilian aircraft. That alone wouldn't have been unusual. The military contracts civilian carriers all the time. But what Cooper saw next broke every regulation in the book. The containers weren't being loaded through normal channels. There were no manifests, no customs officials, no paperwork trail. And the men loading them weren't wearing standard military uniforms. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but they moved with military precision. Cooper watched as 3 different aircraft received these mysterious containers. All civilian planes, all bound for international destinations, all completely off the books. Being the careful pilot he was, Cooper made note of the tail numbers and flight plans. He didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was some kind of classified operation that was above his pay grade. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. Cooper started quietly investigating. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a pilot who'd seen something that violated every safety protocol he'd ever learned. He started keeping track of unusual cargo flights, noting patterns, destinations, and the people involved. Over the next 6 months, Cooper discovered that what he'd witnessed wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic operation involving dozens of flights, multiple aircraft, and cargo that was being moved completely outside official channels. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. In December 1998, Cooper learned that 3 other pilots who had been asking similar questions had died in accidents within the past 2 years. Pilot error, every single time. Equipment failure, bad weather, the same explanations that would later be used to explain Cooper's own disappearance. Cooper wasn't stupid. He knew he was in danger. So he did what any smart pilot would do. He started documenting everything. Flight manifests, photographs, detailed notes about personnel and procedures. He created a paper trail that would protect him if something happened. But Cooper made one crucial mistake. He trusted the wrong person. In January 1999, Cooper decided to report what he'd discovered to the proper authorities. He reached out to what he thought was a Federal Aviation Safety Office. The man who responded was named James Mitchell, and he claimed to represent a classified government operation. Mitchell explained that Cooper had stumbled upon a legitimate covert operation designed to track weapons sales to terrorist organizations. The unmarked containers, Mitchell claimed, contained tracking devices that would help the government monitor terrorist activities. It was a convincing story. Mitchell had all the right credentials, knew all the right details, and spoke with the authority of someone who was definitely government-connected. Cooper wanted to believe him. It would have been so much easier to believe him, but Cooper's instincts told him something different. The operation he'd witnessed wasn't about tracking weapons, it was about selling them. Now here's where Cooper's story becomes both heartbreaking and heroic. Because Mitchell didn't just dismiss Cooper's concerns, he made Cooper an offer that was really an ultimatum. Mitchell told Cooper that since he'd already seen too much, he had two choices. He could become part of the operation, or he could have an accident, like the three other pilots who had asked too many questions. But Mitchell sweetened the deal. He offered Cooper $50,000 per flight to transport special cargo. No questions asked, no paperwork, no problems. All Cooper had to do was fly the routes he was given and keep his mouth shut about what he'd seen. Cooper was trapped. He had a wife and a young daughter. He had a mortgage, college savings, and a life built around being a commercial pilot. If he refused, Mitchell had made it clear that he would end up like the other pilots. If he agreed, he would become part of whatever illegal operation he'd uncovered. So Cooper made a choice that would haunt him for the next 4 years. He agreed to participate, but only because he thought he could find a way to expose the operation from the inside. From February 1999 to October 2003, Cooper made monthly flights carrying unmarked cargo to locations across the Southwest. Each time, Mitchell rode along to ensure Cooper's compliance. The cargo manifests were always falsified, listing the contents as agricultural equipment or mining supplies. But Cooper knew he was transporting weapons. He could tell by the weight distribution, the way the containers were secured, and the locations where they were delivered. Small airstrips in remote areas, destinations that weren't on any commercial flight plan, people who definitely weren't farmers or miners. For 4 years, Cooper lived with the knowledge that he was helping to arm people who would use those weapons to hurt innocent people. He tried to find ways to expose the operation, but Mitchell was always watching, always present, always one step ahead. Cooper's marriage started to suffer. His wife Sarah knew something was wrong, but Cooper couldn't tell her what was happening. He started drinking more, sleeping less, and slowly withdrawing from his family. The man who had been known for his steady nerves and calm demeanor was falling apart. But Cooper kept detailed records of everything, every flight, every destination, every person involved. He hid these records in multiple locations, hoping that someday he would find a way to use them to bring down the entire operation. On October 15, 2003, Cooper received his final mission. And when he saw the cargo manifest, he realized that everything he'd been forced to do for the past 4 years had been leading to this moment. The cargo wasn't weapons this time, it was something far worse. Cooper had overheard Mitchell talking on an encrypted phone about biological samples and field testing. When Cooper pressed for details, Mitchell's response chilled him to the bone. Let's just say some problems in the Middle East are about to solve themselves. Cooper realized he was being asked to transport biological weapons, weapons that would be used to commit genocide against innocent civilians, and the delivery was scheduled for that very day. That morning, as Cooper conducted his pre-flight inspection at Denver International Airport, he knew he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could complete the mission and become complicit in mass murder, or he could refuse and almost certainly be killed. But Cooper had discovered a third option, an option that would require him to sacrifice everything, but would prevent the biological weapons from ever reaching their targets. Cooper's wife Sarah had packed his usual lunch that morning, a turkey sandwich, apple, and thermos of coffee. She kissed him goodbye at the kitchen counter, just like she had thousands of times before. But this time, Cooper held her a little longer. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too. Fly safe," she replied, not knowing those would be the last words they'd ever exchange. Cooper had made his decision. He would fly the mission as ordered, but instead of landing at the Las Vegas airstrip where the biological weapons would be transferred to another aircraft, he would crash land in the mountains and destroy the cargo. He spent the morning studying topographical maps, looking for a location where he could put the plane down without killing Mitchell, while ensuring the biological weapons would be destroyed in the crash. At exactly 1:33 p.m., November 847 Delta lifted off from runway 34R at Denver International Airport. Air traffic control recorded Cooper's voice as calm and professional during the initial climb. But what they didn't record was the life-or-death confrontation happening in the cockpit. "You know what happens if you don't follow through," Mitchell said, settling into the co-pilot seat. "You deliver the package, we forget about everything you've seen. Everyone goes home happy." "I know," Cooper replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. "But there has to be another way." "There is no other way, Captain. You've been part of this operation for 4 years. You're as guilty as anyone else involved." But Cooper had already made his decision. He couldn't be part of genocide. Whatever they did to him, he wouldn't deliver death to innocent people. Cooper's plan was brilliant in its simplicity, but it required perfect timing and nerves of steel. He had identified a small clearing in the Sawtooth Wilderness where he could crash-land the aircraft with minimal damage to the plane itself, but maximum destruction to the cargo. The clearing was surrounded by massive pine trees and was only accessible by an old mining trail. Even if rescue teams found the crash site, it would take them hours to reach it. And by then, Cooper would have had time to destroy the biological weapons and document everything that had happened. At 2:15 p.m., Cooper made his routine position report to Denver Center. "Denver Control, November 847 Delta level at 12,000, all systems normal." His voice betrayed nothing of the struggle that was about to unfold. The confrontation began when Mitchell realized Cooper was deviating from the filed flight plan. They were supposed to be heading southwest toward Las Vegas, but Cooper was flying due west toward the most treacherous peaks of the Colorado Rockies. "What are you doing, Cooper?" Mitchell demanded. "Get back on course." "I can't do it," Cooper said. "I won't transport biological weapons. I won't be part of mass murder." Mitchell pulled a gun. "You don't have a choice. Turn this plane around, or I'll put a bullet in your head and fly it myself." "Go ahead, Mom," Cooper said, "but I'm the only one who knows how to land this thing safely. You shoot me, we both die." For the next hour and a half, Cooper fought to maintain control of the aircraft, while Mitchell tried to force him to change course. The struggle was intense. Mitchell was trained in combat, but Cooper had the advantage of knowing every system on the aircraft. Finally, as they approached the mountain clearing Cooper had targeted, he made his move. He told Mitchell they were going down, and Mitchell could either strap in and survive the landing or keep fighting and die in the crash. Mitchell chose to keep fighting. What happened next would remain a mystery for exactly 25 years, 3 months, and 12 days. But when the truth finally came out, it revealed the true extent of Cooper's heroism and sacrifice. Cooper managed to put the Beechcraft down in the clearing with remarkable skill. The landing was hard enough to knock Mitchell unconscious, but the aircraft remained largely intact. Cooper had achieved exactly what he'd planned, a controlled crash that would destroy the biological weapons without killing anyone unnecessarily. Before I reveal what Cooper found in Mitchell's briefcase, I want to see how many of you are still with me on this incredible journey. If you've made it this far into the story, you're clearly someone who appreciates real investigative content. Show me by hitting that like button. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories that uncover the truth about real heroes, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. But that's when Cooper made the discovery that would define his final hours. In Mitchell's briefcase, Cooper found documents that revealed the full scope of the operation he'd been forced to participate in. The biological weapons program was massive. Dozens of pilots were being used to transport weapons to terrorist cells across the globe. The operation was being run by a group of rogue intelligence operatives who were selling weapons to the highest bidder, regardless of their intentions. But most shocking of all, Cooper discovered that the previous 3 pilots who had died in accidents hadn't died in crashes. They had been murdered, their bodies staged to look like pilot error. Cooper realized that Mitchell had never intended for either of them to survive this flight. Mitchell regained consciousness about an hour after the crash, but his injuries were severe. He had suffered internal bleeding and wouldn't survive long without medical attention. Cooper could have tried to help him, but instead, he used Mitchell's final hours to extract the full truth about the operation. Before Mitchell died, he confirmed Cooper's worst fears. The biological weapons in the cargo hold contained weaponized anthrax, enough to kill hundreds of thousands of people. The attack was scheduled for November 15, 2003, just 1 month away. 3 major cities were targeted: New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Cooper realized that his decision to crash in the mountains hadn't just saved his own soul, it had prevented one of the largest terrorist attacks in history. But Cooper also realized that he was never going to leave that mountain alive. Mitchell had been carrying a satellite phone that would have allowed him to call for extraction. With Mitchell dead, Cooper was stranded in one of the most remote areas of the Rocky Mountains with winter weather approaching. Cooper survived the crash, but he knew he was going to die on that mountain. So he did something that would ultimately expose the entire conspiracy and vindicate his memory. He wrote a confession. Using Mitchell's briefcase and waterproof materials from the aircraft's survival kit, Cooper created a detailed account of everything that had happened. Every flight he'd been forced to make, every weapon he'd transported, every person involved in the operation. But Cooper's confession wasn't just about exposing the conspiracy. It was also a love letter to his family and a plea for understanding. He knew that when his body was eventually found, he would be blamed for the crash. He would be labeled a rogue pilot, a terrorist, a madman. "If you're reading this, I'm dead, and they've covered it up," Cooper wrote. "I know they'll blame me for this. They'll say I was a rogue pilot, a terrorist, a madman, but someone had to stop this. Someone had to make sure these weapons never reached their targets." Cooper spent his final days rigging the biological weapons containers with thermite charges that would activate if anyone tried to move them. He knew that the only way to safely dispose of the weapons was to let them decompose naturally over decades. Cooper's final words revealed the depth of his sacrifice. "I chose to crash this plane because I couldn't live with myself if I delivered death to innocent people. I know my family will suffer for this decision. I know my wife will lose our home, our savings, our future. But I also know that somewhere in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, hundreds of thousands of people will wake up tomorrow because of what I did today." The confession ended with a heartbreaking plea. "Please don't let my family believe I was a terrorist. Please don't let my wife think I abandoned her. Tell them I died trying to save lives, not take them." Cooper sealed the confession in multiple waterproof containers and hid them throughout the aircraft. He knew that eventually someone would find the wreckage. He just hoped it would be someone who would understand what he'd sacrificed. But here's where the story gets even more sinister. Because the people behind the biological weapons operation didn't just let Cooper disappear. They actively worked to ensure that he would never be found, and that if he was found, he would be discredited. The search for Cooper's aircraft was the largest mountain rescue operation in Colorado history. Over 300 volunteers searched 800 square miles of the most dangerous terrain in North America. But despite their efforts, they found nothing. What the search teams didn't know was that the coordinates of Cooper's actual crash site had been deliberately removed from their search grid. Someone with access to the flight tracking data had ensured that rescuers would be looking in the wrong place. For 3 weeks, helicopters battled 60 winds and zero visibility. Ground teams climbed peaks that had never been scaled in October weather. The search was dangerous, exhausting, and ultimately futile because they were searching for a plane that had crashed 50 miles from where they were looking. The official investigation that followed was equally compromised. The NTSB concluded that Cooper had encountered severe weather, lost control of the aircraft, and crashed in terrain so remote that the wreckage might never be found. But here's the cruelest part of the cover-up. They didn't just blame Cooper for the crash. They destroyed his reputation. The official report suggested that Cooper had been drinking before the flight, that he had been experiencing personal problems, and that he had deliberately deviated from his flight plan. None of it was true. Cooper's blood alcohol level was 0. His marriage was solid. His flight plan deviation was explained by the weather conditions. But the people responsible for the cover-up needed Cooper to be the villain, not the hero. Cooper's family was devastated. His wife Sarah fought the findings for 3 years, hiring private investigators and aviation experts. She knew her husband better than anyone. William Cooper didn't make mistakes. He didn't take risks. He didn't deviate from flight plans. But without evidence, Sarah's appeals fell on deaf ears. The insurance company ruled it pilot error and reduced the payout to Cooper's family by 60%. Sarah was forced to sell their home and move in with her sister. The man who had died saving hundreds of thousands of lives was remembered as a failure who had destroyed his own family. For 25 years, the truth about William Cooper remained buried on a remote mountain peak. But in June 2023, two civilian hikers made a discovery that would change everything. Retired school teacher Patricia Wells and her hiking partner, geologist Dr. Marcus Kim, were attempting to reach an unnamed peak in the Sawtooth Wilderness when Kim's GPS unit started acting erratically. "We're getting some kind of interference," Kim told Wells. "Metal, probably. Lots of it." They followed the signal for another quarter-mile until they reached a small clearing surrounded by massive pine trees. At first glance, it looked like any other mountain meadow, but Kim's trained eye noticed something that 25 years of search teams had missed. "Pat, look at these trees," Kim called out. "See how they're growing in that weird pattern? Something heavy hit the ground here. Recently, geologically speaking." They began clearing away 25 years of accumulated pine needles and undergrowth. 3 feet down, Kim's shovel struck metal. An hour of careful digging revealed a piece of aircraft aluminum with numbers still visible. N847D. They had found William Cooper's plane, but what they discovered next proved that everything the official investigation had concluded was wrong. The main fuselage was buried under decades of forest debris, but it was largely intact. More importantly, it wasn't scattered across the mountainside like a high-speed crash would have produced. The aircraft had made a controlled landing in the small clearing. Cooper had put the plane down like a professional pilot, not crashed it like a reckless amateur. Inside the cockpit, they found human remains still wearing Cooper's flight jacket. But the co-pilot seat contained something that would rewrite aviation history. A briefcase wrapped in plastic and duct tape, secured to the seat with aircraft cable. Inside the briefcase, Kim and Wells found the documents that Cooper had intended to be discovered. Flight manifests, cargo receipts, photographs, and most importantly, the handwritten confession that revealed the entire conspiracy. For the first time in 25 years, someone other than Cooper knew the truth about what had happened on that mountain. And unlike the official investigators, Kim and Wells weren't going to let that truth be buried. Kim and Wells immediately contacted the FBI, who arrived at the crash site within hours. The initial investigation confirmed Cooper's account in every detail. The biological weapons containers were exactly where Cooper had described them, though their contents had degraded to harmlessness over 2 decades. More importantly, the FBI was able to use the information in Cooper's confession to uncover the entire weapons smuggling network. The operation was even larger than Cooper had realized, spanning 3 continents and involving dozens of government officials and military personnel. This is where I get emotional every time I tell this story. After 25 years of being branded a failure, Cooper was finally vindicated. If you believe that heroes like Cooper deserve recognition, smash that like button. Let's show some love for the families who suffer while their heroes are forgotten. Over the following months, arrests were made across the globe. The investigation revealed that Cooper's sacrifice had indeed prevented a coordinated biological weapons attack that would have killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The attack had been scheduled for November 15, 2003, exactly 1 month after Cooper's disappearance. By choosing to crash in the mountains instead of completing his mission, Cooper had prevented one of the largest terrorist attacks in history. But the vindication came too late for Sarah Cooper, who had passed away in 2019, still believing that her husband had been blamed unfairly for his own death. She never knew that William Cooper had died a hero. In March 2024, the NTSB issued an unprecedented public apology, acknowledging that their original investigation had been fundamentally flawed and that Cooper had been wrongfully blamed for an incident beyond his control. The truth about Cooper's sacrifice was declassified and released to the public in a heavily redacted report. While many details remain classified, the essential facts are clear. William Cooper died preventing one of the largest biological weapons attacks in history. Dr. Patricia Wells, the teacher who found Cooper's confession, spoke at the memorial service held in Cooper's honor. For 25 years, this man was called a failure, a rogue pilot who made a fatal mistake. But the truth is that William Cooper made the hardest choice a person can make. He chose to sacrifice everything to save the lives of strangers he would never meet. The story of William Cooper teaches us something profound about heroism and sacrifice. Real heroes don't always get recognition. Sometimes they're blamed for the very disasters they prevent. Sometimes they're forgotten by history, remembered only by the families who loved them. The small clearing where Cooper made his final landing has been designated as a memorial site. A simple plaque reads, "Captain William Cooper, he chose others over himself." But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Cooper's sacrifice came from the families of the other pilots who had died in suspicious accidents. Cooper's confession led to the reopening of those cases, and all three pilots were ultimately vindicated as well. Today, Cooper's story is taught at the FBI Academy as an example of courage under extreme pressure. His confession is used to train investigators on how to recognize and investigate complex conspiracies. Cooper's daughter, Rebecca, who was only 8 years old when her father disappeared, was there when the military honor guard presented her with the flag that had flown over the Capitol in her father's honor. "My mother spent 16 years fighting for the truth," Rebecca said. "She always knew Dad was a hero. She just couldn't prove it. But he proved it himself in the end. He left us the evidence we needed to clear his name. The biological weapons that Cooper died preventing from reaching their targets would have killed an estimated 300,000 people in the coordinated attack. By choosing to crash in the mountains instead of completing his mission, Cooper saved more lives than perhaps any pilot in history. In the end, William Cooper's 25-year silence was broken not by investigators or government officials, but by two civilian hikers with a GPS device and the determination to uncover the truth. Sometimes the most important discoveries are made not by those who are looking for answers, but by those who stumble upon them in the most unexpected places. But let me tell you why this story matters so much more than just one man's heroism. Because William Cooper's sacrifice reveals something profound about the nature of heroism itself, and about the invisible threads that connect our individual choices to the fate of countless strangers. Think about this for a moment. On October 15, 2003, hundreds of thousands of people in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago went about their daily lives completely unaware that their survival depended on the moral courage of a cargo pilot they'd never heard of. Children went to school, parents went to work, families made dinner plans, all because one man chose death over complicity. Cooper could have completed that final mission. He could have delivered the biological weapons, collected his payment, and gone home to his wife and daughter. The attack would have happened a month later, and Cooper would have lived with the knowledge of what he'd enabled. But he chose differently. He chose to sacrifice everything: his life, his reputation, his family's financial security, to protect people who would never know his name. This raises a haunting question. How many other William Coopers are out there? How many quiet heroes are making impossible choices right now, sacrificing themselves to prevent disasters we'll never know were coming? How many times has humanity been saved by someone who was never recognized, never thanked, never even acknowledged? Cooper's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about heroism. We're conditioned to think of heroes as people who receive medals, parades, and recognition. We imagine heroes as larger-than-life figures who are celebrated for their bravery. But real heroism often looks different. Real heroism sometimes means being blamed for the very disaster you prevented. Real heroism sometimes means your family loses everything while the world believes you were a failure. Sarah Cooper spent 16 years fighting to clear her husband's name. 16 years of being told she was wrong, that her husband was reckless, that the experts knew better than she did. Imagine carrying that burden, knowing in your heart that the man you loved was a hero, but having no way to prove it to a world that had already made up its mind. And what about Rebecca Cooper, who grew up believing her father was a pilot who made a fatal mistake? Imagine discovering at age 28 that your father, who you'd been told was responsible for his own death, had actually died saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Imagine learning that every time someone had pitied you for having a reckless father, they should have been thanking you for having a heroic one. Cooper's story also reveals something disturbing about our institutions and the people we trust to protect us. For 25 years, government agencies, aviation authorities, and insurance companies all perpetuated a lie. They didn't just fail to discover the truth, they actively suppressed it. They destroyed Cooper's reputation to protect a narrative that served their interests. This wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate. Someone in a position of authority made the conscious decision that William Cooper needed to be the villain of this story, not the hero. Someone decided that protecting the conspiracy was more important than honoring the man who died exposing it. From a purely technical standpoint, what Cooper accomplished on October 15, 2003 was extraordinary. He managed to crash land a twin-engine aircraft in a mountain clearing barely large enough to accommodate it, while fighting off an armed co-pilot, while ensuring the biological weapons would be destroyed. This wasn't luck, this was skill, planning, and nerves of steel. Cooper had studied that clearing on topographical maps. He knew the wind patterns, the approach angles, the margin for error. He planned every aspect of that crash landing while maintaining the facade of a normal flight. He was simultaneously fighting for control of his aircraft and executing one of the most precise emergency landings in aviation history. But here's what really gives me chills about this story. Cooper's sacrifice didn't just save the 300,000 people who would have died in the biological weapons attack. It saved everyone those people would have gone on to touch, to influence, to love. It saved their children, their grandchildren, their contributions to society. Think about the doctors who might have been among those 300,000 victims, doctors who have gone on to save thousands more lives. Think about the teachers who have educated the next generation, the researchers who have made breakthrough discoveries, the artists who have created beauty in the world. Cooper didn't just prevent one attack, he preserved countless potential futures. Cooper's story is especially relevant in our current era of global interconnectedness and technological vulnerability. We live in a world where a small group of people with the right knowledge and resources can threaten millions of lives. We depend on the moral courage of individuals, pilots, scientists, engineers, intelligence officers to choose humanity over personal gain. Right now, somewhere in the world, there might be another William Cooper facing a similar choice. Someone with access to dangerous technology, someone being pressured to participate in something that could harm innocent people, someone who has to decide between their own safety and the greater good. Let's not forget the personal cost of Cooper's heroism. He spent the last 4 years of his life living a lie, participating in an operation he despised, watching weapons flow to people who would use them to hurt innocents. He couldn't tell his wife what was happening. He couldn't seek help or support. He had to carry that burden alone, knowing that any mistake could result in his death. Cooper lived with survivor's guilt before he even became a victim. He knew that other pilots had died for asking the same questions he was asking. He knew that his participation in the weapons smuggling operation was helping to arm terrorists. He had to reconcile his role as a protector, a pilot responsible for safety, with his forced complicity in violence. But ultimately, Cooper's story is about the power of individual moral choice. In a conspiracy involving dozens of people across multiple continents, in an operation with massive financial and political backing, one cargo pilot's conscience proved more powerful than all of it. Cooper couldn't stop the entire weapons smuggling network that took 25 years in a federal investigation. But he could stop the biological weapons attack. He could save those 300,000 lives. He could choose to be remembered as a hero rather than live as a participant in genocide. Captain William Cooper filed his final flight plan on October 15, 2003. It took 25 years for that flight plan to be completed, but in the end he reached his intended destination, the truth. The man they called Textbook Cooper had written his final chapter exactly the way he lived his life by the book, following the highest principles of aviation safety and human decency. He chose to protect and serve, even when it cost him everything. Today, if you drive through the mountains of Colorado and look up at those peaks where Cooper made his final landing, remember that somewhere up there, a hero chose others over himself. Remember that the reason you can breathe freely, the reason your children can play safely, the reason our cities still stand, might have everything to do with choices made by people whose names you'll never know. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what real heroism looks like, then William Cooper's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Share this story. Remember his name. And remember that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who sacrifice everything to prevent disasters the world will never know were coming. But more than that, let Cooper's story inspire you to recognize the William Coopers in your own life. The quiet people who make difficult choices, who sacrifice for others, who choose principle over profit. They might not be preventing biological weapons attacks, but they're making our world better in ways large and small. And if you ever find yourself facing a choice between what's easy and what's right, between personal gain and the greater good, remember Captain William Cooper. Remember that one person's courage can save hundreds of thousands of lives. Remember that heroes aren't always celebrated, but they're always necessary. Before you go, I need you to do three things. First, if this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories like Cooper's. Second, subscribe and turn on notifications because I'm dedicated to uncovering more stories of forgotten heroes that powerful people don't want you to know about. And third, tell me in the comments, who is the unsung hero in your life? Who deserves recognition but never gets it? Let's honor the William Coopers all around us. If you want to dive deeper into stories of conspiracy, cover-ups, and forgotten heroes, check out the videos I'm recommending right here. Trust me, once you start uncovering the truth about what really happens behind closed doors, you'll never see the world the same way again. William Cooper's final message has been delivered. His story has been told, and justice, delayed by 25 years, has finally been served.